General Hospital will reveal throughout her pregnancy, Sasha lived in a constant state of anxiety, haunted not only by the lingering pain of losing her first child, Liam, but also by a growing fear that history might repeat itself. Liam, the son she once shared with Brando, had been born with severe brain damage due to oxygen deprivation. The trauma of making the impossible decision to remove him from life support left a permanent scar on Sasha's heart. No amount of time could erase that loss. And no amount of hope could completely silence the dread that another child might suffer a similar fate. Her fears became more than just nightmares when doctors began to suspect something wrong during her routine prenatal appointments. They noticed irregularities in the baby's heartbeat. Subtle yet concerning. Sasha clung to the fragile hope that it was nothing serious, that this time the universe might show mercy. But the truth came crashing down after the baby was born. Her son had a congenital heart defect, the very same one Michael had suffered from as an infant. The diagnosis was a cruel echo of the past, and suddenly, Sasha could no longer deny the truth she had kept hidden for so long. Michael was the father of her child, and only he could decide the best course of action to save their son's life. Faced with a terrifying reality, Sasha knew she couldn't delay any longer. She picked up the phone and called Michael, who at the time was still in Germany undergoing treatment for severe burns after the apartment fire at Sunny's penthouse. Sasha's voice was steady, but beneath the surface, her heart was breaking. She told him the truth, about the baby, the diagnosis, and the fact that he was the child's biological father. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. For a moment, she feared he might hang up, overwhelmed by shock and betrayal. But Michael didn't waver. The initial wave of disbelief quickly gave way to clarity. None of his pain, none of the medical procedures or emotional turmoil he was enduring, mattered more than the life of his child. Without hesitation, he demanded to be discharged, abandoning his own treatment to return to Port Charles immediately. Against medical advice, he boarded a private flight arranged by the Quartermain family and arrived at General Hospital within hours, bruised, bandaged, but more determined than ever. When he stepped into the neonatal intensive care unit and saw the tiny infant struggling to breathe, something shifted inside him. The burn wounds, the heartbreak over Willow, the divorce, everything faded into the background. In that moment, Michael wasn't a man recovering from trauma or a father fighting for custody of his other children. He was simply a dad, standing before the most fragile part of himself, ready to do whatever it took to protect his son. There were no dramatic confrontations, no angry words exchanged with Sasha. Instead, they shared a quiet, solemn understanding. Through everything, lies, secrets, heartbreak, they had created a life together, and now that life was in danger. Sasha watched in silence as Michael gently picked up the baby, holding him close with a kind of reverence only a parent could understand. It was in that instant she knew she had made the right choice. Michael wasted no time. He contacted a leading children's cardiac specialist in Germany, the very same facility that had saved his life as an infant. The best doctors, the best technology, the best chance for his son. Within hours, arrangements were made. A medical transport jet, fully equipped, was readied. Sasha stood at the hospital window, arms wrapped tightly around herself. As she watched the plane take off carrying her child and the man she once loved, her heart was torn, but she felt something unfamiliar, relief. Back in Port Charles, Carly was beginning to piece everything together. She remembered the moment Michael, fresh from the fire and barely conscious, had asked to speak to Sasha. She remembered how Jason had suddenly taken on a protective role around Sasha, how carefully he'd danced around questions about the baby's paternity. The pieces formed a clear picture, and Carly, far from angry, felt a swell of joy. Another grandchild. Another link in the Corinthos legacy. She silently vowed to support Sasha in any way she could during Michael's absence. Meanwhile, the news of the baby's condition began to spread quietly. Willow, entangled in a budding romance with Drew, sensed something deeper was stirring. Though she tried to focus on her own life. The uncanny parallel between Sasha's baby and Wiley gnawed at her. Was fate trying to tell her something? If Sasha's baby had the same heart condition, could it mean he was truly Michael's? And if so, what would that mean for everything Willow had built since her divorce? While the world around her buzzed with questions and whispers, Sasha remained still. She had done what was right. She had let go of her fear, exposed her secret, and trusted Michael to do what only he could. And Michael, bruised, broken, but fiercely resolute, had become the father their son needed. Whether or not it would lead them back to each other no longer mattered. All that mattered was the tiny heartbeat now in Germany, fighting to survive, with his father by his side. There was no tearful reunion, no dramatic exchange of regrets or anger from the past, only a heavy silence that spoke volumes. When Michael arrived at the hospital, still bearing the marks of his injuries and exhaustion from travel, he didn't rush toward Sasha, nor did he demand answers. Instead, his gaze moved straight to the small incubator that housed the most fragile part of his heart, his newborn son. And when he finally lifted the baby into his arms, gently, almost reverently, it was as if time folded in on itself. In that single moment, all the distance, the silence, the secrets, they melted away. Sasha watched from a few steps away. Her face pale and drawn from sleepless nights and emotional turmoil. Yet despite her fatigue, her eyes shimmered faintly, not with fear or guilt, but with hope. Michael didn't say anything. And he didn't need to. The way he cradled the baby against his chest, instinctively and protectively, told her everything. It was the look of a man who knew this child was his. And that nothing else in the world mattered more than keeping him alive. That quiet moment between them, void of accusations or apologies, marked the beginning of a new chapter, not just for the child, but for them as well. Michael hadn't just brought luggage to the hospital. He had brought with him the full weight of his resolve. His decision was made the moment Sasha told him the truth. Their son needed urgent cardiac treatment that Port Charles couldn't provide. And if that meant returning to Germany, to the place where he had only just begun healing himself, then so be it. His own recovery, his pain, his past, all of it was secondary to the life of his child. No sacrifice would be too great. Arrangements were made swiftly. The Quatermain family, with all their wealth and influence, ensured that every detail was handled without delay. A private medical jet was prepped for immediate departure. Equipped with neonatal specialists and the latest technology, ready to transport the baby to the top pediatric cardiology center in Munich. The flight would take off before dawn. Michael held his son close as they boarded the plane, wrapping the infant in a soft blanket, his arms forming a shield against the cold night air and the uncertainty ahead. He didn't flinch. Didn't hesitate. He moved with the calm determination of a man who had been broken before but now found purpose in something greater than himself. Inside, he was terrified. But his face showed only strength. The child's soft breathing against his chest gave him courage. From the edge of the tarmac, Sasha stood in silence, her hands clasped tightly, as if holding herself together by sheer will. Her heart felt as though it were being torn in two. Part of her ached to go with them, to be by her baby's side every second. But another part, a deeper, more instinctual part, knew that she had already made the hardest choice a mother could make. She was entrusting her child to someone who had not only the means to protect him, but the heart to fight for him with every ounce of strength he had left. It wasn't about money. It wasn't about power. It was about love, unconditional, selfless love. Michael hadn't asked for this responsibility, but he embraced it completely. Sasha knew, without a doubt, that their son was in the safest place he could possibly be. In the arms of the one person who would never stop fighting for him. As the engines roared to life and the jet began to move, Sasha's breath caught in her throat. Her vision blurred with tears. Not of despair, but of release. She had done everything she could. Now it was up to Michael, and the miracle of modern medicine, to bring their son home, healthy and whole. And maybe, just maybe, this journey would also lead them all back to each other. Meanwhile, Carly, always sharp-eyed when it came to the secrets swirling within her family, was quietly putting together the puzzle pieces. One by one. It wasn't a sudden revelation, but rather the steady accumulation of small moments, subtle clues, and familiar instincts that led her to the truth. She remembered vividly the moment Michael, barely conscious after the fire, had asked to see Sasha. At the time, it had seemed like a vague request from a man clinging to life. But now, in retrospect, it was a cry rooted in something much deeper. She recalled how Jason had suddenly started spending more time around Sasha, not in an overt way, but with the kind of quiet protectiveness that didn't go unnoticed. There had been hushed conversations, seemingly casual encounters at the hospital, and the ever-present way Jason deflected any questions about the baby's father with practiced ease. Every time someone brought it up, he'd look away, change the subject, or give an answer so vague it raised more questions than it answered. Carly knew Jason better than anyone. She could see the burden in his eyes, the weight of a secret he never wanted to carry. And Jason, for all his strength and stoicism, had never been good at hiding the truth from her. All it took was connecting those threads, Michael's plea to see Sasha, Jason's protective distance, and Sasha's visible anxiety whenever the topic of the baby came up, for Carly to arrive at the inevitable conclusion. Michael was the child's father. There was no longer any doubt in her mind. When that realization settled in, Carly's heart clenched with a complex mix of emotions, joy, sorrow, protectiveness, and an overwhelming sense of urgency. Joy because another grandchild had entered her life, carrying the Corinthos legacy in his veins. Sorrow because the child was already fighting for his life before he even had the chance to truly live it. And protectiveness, because she could see clearly now how much Sasha had endured alone, shielding Michael and their child from the chaos of their tangled family history. Carly knew this wasn't the time for judgment or confrontation. There would be a time to talk, to ask questions, and to confront what had been hidden. But for now, she made herself a silent promise: she would be Sasha's rock while Michael was away. She would protect that child's place in the Corinthos family no matter what it took, even if it meant standing up to Willow, or navigating the ever-present undercurrents of Quartermain politics. Carly had made many mistakes in her life, but when it came to family, her loyalty was unwavering. And in that moment, Sasha and the baby became her family. Across town, Willow was beginning to feel the ripple effects of the truth she hadn't yet uncovered but could sense brewing beneath the surface. She had noticed the strange quietness in Michael's messages. The way he'd grown distant, even before Sasha's baby was born. And though she told herself it was simply the trauma from his injuries, a small voice inside her whispered that it was something more. There was something unsettlingly familiar about the reports she heard, about the baby's heart condition, about the medical team being flown in, about the hushed tones in which people spoke around the hospital corridors. She remembered how Wiley had struggled with the same congenital defect. She remembered the fear, the sleepless nights, the prayers whispered into darkness. And though she didn't want to believe it, the possibility that this child was Michael's gnawed at her. Willow tried to focus on the new life she was building with Drew. He was steady, kind, everything she thought she needed after the heartbreak and chaos of her marriage to Michael. But no matter how hard she tried to distance herself emotionally, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting. Something big. And it wasn't just about Michael becoming a father again, it was about the implications that came with it. The idea of Michael forming a family unit with Sasha stirred an unexpected pang of jealousy and fear. Sasha had once been nothing more than a shadow in Willow's relationship with Michael, a past fling, a buried mistake. But now, with a child in the picture, Sasha suddenly held more than just emotional weight. She had leverage. She had presence. And if the town learned that Michael was the baby's father, Willow could feel her legal footing in any custody discussion beginning to slip. In the courtroom of family law, public perception and moral ground mattered. And a newly reunited family, Michael, Sasha, and their newborn son, could be a powerful force. For the first time, Willow considered the very real possibility that she might not win, not just in the courtroom, but in Michael's heart. The tides in Port Charles were shifting, and she wasn't sure anymore if she'd be able to swim against them. The truth about the baby's paternity was never going to remain hidden forever. Secrets, especially in Port Charles, have a way of surfacing, slowly at first, then all at once, leaving behind a trail of emotional wreckage and unspoken truths. Jason had known this from the start. He had stepped into the role of protector, not to deceive, but to shield Sasha during a time when she had no one else to turn to. He never once claimed to be the baby's father. The name on the hospital forms, the whispered assumptions from staff, the knowing glances from bystanders, none of it was ever confirmed. It was merely a temporary illusion. A necessary facade to protect the mother and child from scrutiny while Sasha wrestled with the consequences of her past and the uncertain future ahead. Jason had always thrived in the shadows, offering silent support rather than grand gestures. He was never the man to demand recognition or acknowledgement. And now, as Michael returned to take his rightful place beside his child, Jason understood that his part in this story had come to an end. There was no bitterness, no resentment, only a quiet acceptance. He had done what he needed to do, and now it was time to step back. To allow Sasha and Michael the space to rebuild what had been broken and to write the next chapter of their story, one that no longer required his presence. With the same quiet resolve that defined him, Jason faded from the spotlight, offering no explanations and asking for none. He left Sasha with a reassuring nod. A silent promise that if she ever needed him again, he would be there. Then, just as he had appeared, he was gone. As for Sasha, she found herself suspended in an emotional limbo. Even as Michael had re-entered her life with a force of purpose and devotion she hadn't expected, she still struggled to believe in the possibility of a happy ending. Her heart had been broken too many times, by grief, by abandonment, by the cruel unpredictability of life. Hope felt dangerous, almost foolish. And yet, as she stood alone in her apartment, a message from Michael lit up her phone screen, pulling her from the spiral of doubt. It was short, but powerful. He's stable. The best doctors in Germany are monitoring him around the clock. They're hopeful. We're going to get through this. Together. The words, though simple, wrapped around her like a warm embrace. For a moment, Sasha stood still, staring at the message, her breath catching in her throat. Then, slowly, a single tear slipped down her cheek, not from sorrow, but from a deep, profound sense of relief. For so long, she had braced herself for the worst. She had prepared to grieve again, to shoulder the burden alone. But now, for the first time in what felt like forever, there was hope. Michael was not just returning as the father of her child, he was returning as the man who was ready to face the future with her, not out of obligation, but from a place of genuine love and commitment. He wasn't trying to fix the past, nor was he seeking redemption for old mistakes. Instead, he had chosen to walk forward with her, one uncertain step at a time, toward a life neither of them had planned, but both desperately needed. And in that moment, Sasha allowed herself to believe. Not in a fairy tale, not in perfection, but in the possibility of healing. The possibility of love reborn from pain. The possibility of a family, fragile yet real, forming from the ruins of what was once lost. She wiped the tear from her cheek, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, not in fear, but in quiet hope. They're going to be okay. We're going to be okay.